Hello everybody, and I'm David Palmer from the University of Hong Kong, and this is Martin Tse, and we're going to be giving you a presentation today, which is entitled "The Civil Martial Structure in Chinese Communal Religion: A Buddhist-Daoist Jiao Ritual in Northern Guangdong." This is going to be a presentation about ritual in Chinese religion, and you might wonder what is the connection with martial arts. And indeed, what we're going to be presenting is a little bit different from what I think is the focus of most of the papers and presentations at this conference, which tend to focus a lot on the martial arts as an individual technique of combat and the different culture and social practices surrounding that. But actually, what we're going to be presented is very directly relevant, and we're going to be really asking the question about the significance of the notion of wu, the martial, in Chinese culture and religion. And the reason we get into this is precisely because this ritual tradition, which we've been studying, has a very strong emphasis on both the civil, the wen, and the martial, the wu. And so it raises a lot of questions on the cultural, the political, and the religious positioning of the martial within a broader ritual, religious, and political system. So these are some of the questions we're going to be raising in this presentation. What we're going to do is first we're going to present some details about this case, and then second we're going to go into a presentation and an analysis of the contrasting and complementary civil and martial dimensions of this ritual tradition. And thirdly, then I'm going to raise some questions for further discussion based on the implications of this study. So this is a research which was conducted in northern Guangdong province, about 2 hours north of the city of Guangzhou or Canton in southern China. And so actually this is research which was conducted already more than 15 years ago. It started in 2004 in this village of Xicun, where there are about 623 families which reside there. And it's really a very, and one could say, on the face of it, nothing really unique in particular. We can see the temple, a very small, very typical type of small temple in northern Guangdong province. So if you were to go through there, you really wouldn't see, you really wouldn't notice anything very particular if you were like to drive through this region. Although the rituals that we're going to be observing, these are communal rituals that take place on a cyclical basis. The large-scale ones, the communal Jiao ritual, takes place every 10 years, but then there are other cycles every 5 and 3 years. And one of the instances that we observed was at the renovation of this temple, the Yongxing Miao, in 2006. So in the video you'll see it's much nicer, the temple is much nicer than here. And we worked with a local priest, so they're the senior priests, Jinbo Li Daoqi. And an important feature of the ritual tradition here, as we see actually often in many parts of southern China, is that the priests can master or can perform more than one ritual tradition. And so here they perform both a Buddhist tradition, which is called Namulao in the local dialect, and a Daoist tradition of the Lüshan lineage, and which is called the Tiaoguilao in the local region. So this project is based on the combination of ethnographic observation of the ritual tradition and also working with the texts. We've been working on the analysis of the manuscripts which are used by the ritual masters when they're performing the rituals. And we have conducted interviews with the priests and showed them the videos to get commentary and so on. And this is a tradition that is pretty well preserved, relatively speaking, because during the Maoist period, the Cultural Revolution, the period of interruption was relatively short, an 8-year delay. And when we consider that the cycle of the main ritual is every 10 years, so actually the 8-year interruption the impact wasn't too profound. So first of all, just to give you an idea of the overall atmosphere, we're going to show you one clip about one or a little more than 1 minute, so that you can get a sense of what's going on. So this is at the Kaiguang inauguration of the renovated temple. So actually, just in that little video clip, just one thing to point out, when you saw the priest who was blowing the horn, actually that is a martial dimension of the ritual tradition, where actually the blowing of the horn is to call the spirit soldiers. So the priest is actually acting as a general who's convoking and calling the spirit soldiers over, and then to send them off to fight against the demons. So this is a tradition which has a highly elaborated combination of two altars, the wen-tan and the wu-tan, the civil altar and the martial altar. And this is a combination that we can find in ritual traditions throughout South China, but in this particular instance, the martial altar is equally as important as the civil altar, and this was relatively unique. And so this is through this particular case, we have a much more visible and much more complete performance of the martial part of the ritual. And so in the Jiao ritual, you have two ritual spaces, or one ritual space, but with two altars facing each other in the ritual space. And throughout the entire 4 days and 3 nights, continuously, all day and all night long, there is ritual activity going on both in the civil altar and the martial altar. And what is going on in the two altars is actually coordinated and synchronized, and contrasting and complementary. And so we'll have more explanation of that in a few minutes. So the Buddhist, on the civil altar, we have priests that identify with a Buddhist tradition. As you can see, if you read Chinese, you have the Fo here, which means Buddhist. So they wear a Buddhist hat, and so the ritual activity on the civil altar is primarily around the recitation of sutras, the recitation of texts, as you can see in this short clip. So in the civil altar, that kind of rhythm and that kind of chanting and in different variations pretty much goes on almost nonstop for the entire 4 days. Now on the other side, the opposite side, you have the martial altar. This is a unique regional Taoist tradition, which is called the Lüshan Pai, the Lüshan tradition, where it is said to be originated with three women magicians, the Sannai. And so the priests, when they perform this ritual, they actually cross-dress as women. So these are male priests who are dressed as females. And in this, in the martial altar, so there's this cross-dressing, this inversion, and there's also, you can see the crowds. There's a lot of comedy and laughing and so on. There's a kind of cross-talk comedy that goes on between the priests. So the atmosphere is quite different from the solemn seriousness of the civil altar. And another feature of the martial altar is the elements of local religious culture. So you have local goddesses such as Cao Nyang Nyang, and other local features, local history. Locality is featured in the martial altar and not so much in the civil altar. So just to give you a sense of the feel of the martial altar, we have a video clip here. What you saw in that little video clip, you saw a lot of spinning. So the Lüshan priests, they spin and they turn, and this is called a tiaoshen. And basically, it's through this spinning is a way of bringing down the spiritual powers, bringing down the magical and spiritual powers, so that then they will be able to exercise their powers to expel and exorcise the demons. So now Martin is going to give just a brief summary of the overall rundown and structure of the ritual.
So David has just mentioned that the two altars are very complementary with each other. Right, they appear to be very distinct altars, separate from each other, but at the same time they are actually working to address the same kind of spiritual or ritual reality indeed. So civil altar did it in a very civil way, and martial altar in a very martial way. So I'm going to explain briefly how. So first, the civil altar and martial altar throughout the 4 or 5 days of communal festival, throughout the ritual, they would first set up their altar. Civil altar set up by inviting the very universal Buddha down here from the heavenly realm, actually from the realm of the Pure Land from the Buddha. And the martial altar would start to invite the masters of their lineage, of their exorcistic rites lineage there. So their master would come down to the altar and then to give the priest power. So that kind of power is actually a very military power. The master would endorse the priest with the ability to instruct generals, the spiritual soldiers, to patrol around the village later on. So this is something to note about the martial aspect. How they are going to address the same reality, it can be found when they try to work on the ancestors of the community members. So on the civil side, they are going to rescue the ancestors from the hell bureaucracy. So the hell is being depicted as a place full of bureaucrats. And if you need to save your ancestors out from this suffering place, you must get the priest in a very civil way, sign off the petitions, and so that the souls, the souls of the dead can obtain the permits to pass through the hell bureaucrats. But the marshal is going to do it in a very different way. They are going to attack hell. They are going to send off soldiers to break the gate of the hell, and so that the ancestors can go home after the attack. So both dealing with ancestors, but in very different way. And then for their all along their festival, they would do several kinds of rites. The civil altar would rescue the dead, and the martial altar would deal with the well-being of life. So the marshal, it's about getting blessings, about warding off ghosts, about exorcistic rites. So one deals with the dead, one deals with life. And lastly, when they end the ritual, the silver altar will just send off the Buddha, the Bodhisattvas, the deities in a very polite way, like sending off the very honorable guests, like the officials. But then for the martial altar, how they send off things, they would actually first build a boat, and then on that boat they get that evil, dirty things loaded, and then send the boat off the village there. And then along, soldiers would have escorted the boat, and so that the boat can travel way down the river, far away from the village. So no more evil things in this village, and they are to be received by the next door village. And then also they would send off the deities. So this is what's happening.
So now we just want to just present, in a sense, a structural analysis of the contrast and complementarity between the civil and martial altar. And so basically the civil altar in this spatial, and structural arrangement is on the upper, and actually the local people call it the upper altar, the shangtan, and they call the martial altar the lower altar, the xiatan. So the civil is in the position of yang, and the martial is in the position of yin. And in conformity with the Chinese cosmological arrangement of space and the arrangement of imperial power within the space, the civil altar is it's in the north, with the back to the north and facing south, which is the position of the emperor, whereas the martial altar is in the south facing north. That's the position of the superior, the inferior one, the subordinate one looking at the ruler. And so as we mentioned, the civil altar is Buddhist and textual, whereas the martial altar is Taoist and it is body focused. So civil is text focused, martial is body focused. The priests, actually they would start their career mostly on the martial side. So the junior ones are more on the martial side, and then when they become more senior, they would do more of the civil rituals.
So for the ritual means, I've mentioned a little bit already, but to repeat, the civil altar did it by giving out or sending off the imperial petitions to the Buddha. So Buddha is being known as some kind of very top, high, transcendental officials that governs the world, the civil order of the world. So on the martial side, it's about instructing different soldiers and generals to patrol around to guard the territory. So it's actually attached to local because it's a military power to protect the spot. And as mentioned by David, the civil altar often appears to be more solemn and the martial altar more humorous. And right, so the others, so mentioned but a few. For example, the offering in the civil altar is about offering very simple chants of silcha. So you read the text and that you would accumulate merits as a kind of offering to the gods on the civil side. But on the martial side, you can't only offer this kind of modest chants. You need to set up a whole banquet of blood sacrifice, of the meat, of all the inside organs of pigs, lamb, and whatever very tasty food to the gods. So this is very distinct difference.
So to finish off, I just want to raise a few questions that actually, which come to us as we work on this case and as we compare to other ritual traditions in China and Asia, and also some of these are questions that I'd be very interested in our discussion in this panel. So the first is we've actually, among field workers who've worked on religion and popular religion in South China, we do this kind of structure. There is always some kind of a structure which has different names in different regions. So for example, in some areas such as Taiwan, it's called the Dao Fa Armen. So you also have two simultaneous and traditions going on at the same time. One is called Dao, the other one's called Fa. And there are other types of similar combinations, such as Daogong, Shigong in some ethnic minorities in South China. And actually, all of these can kind of boil down to a civil and a martial structure. One of the two is usually more civil, more wen, and the other one is more martial. It is more wu. And what we will see is that in this civil martial structure, the specific content of the ritual tradition might change. So in the case that we've studied, so the Buddhist, the civil altar is Buddhist and the martial is Taoist, but in other places, both might be Taoist, but two different Taoist traditions, a more civil Taoist tradition in the civil altar and a more martial Taoist tradition in the martial altar. So there's this common, we're looking at a very common structure that we find in South China. And as we look at this tradition, we could see that on the one hand, the civil is, in our particular case, it is more universal. It has, and it is associated with a higher level of culture and civility, whereas the martial side is related to locality, local traditions, and is actually even considered by the local people as not so orthodox, somewhat heterodox. And so it seems to me that we have here a ritualization of the structure of political relationships between the imperial civilizing center in China and local society. So the civilizing center comes in with with its civilizing rituals, but it does not eliminate the local culture. Rather, it subordinates and incorporates them, and they are encapsulated in the martial side of the structure. So, understanding the relationship of wen and wu in comparison with the relationship between center and local, or center and periphery, it can give us a lot of very interesting insights on the nature of political relationships in Chinese in Chinese civilization. And so I'm actually quite curious about if there is any similar structure in other Asian traditions. I'm doing another project on Taoist ritual among the Yao ethnic minority in southwest China, in Yunnan, but also in Laos and Vietnam, in the borderlands there, and in Laos, looking at actually some of the other religious traditions. I have a sense, well, not only among the Yao, we definitely have this structure, but we also can see it, although maybe not so visible, among the relationship between Theravada Buddhism and some local traditions, where the Theravada Buddhism, once again, represents the royal, civilizing, centralizing tradition, and then not so visible, but always there, always present, are some local traditions, which are also more body-focused, and which have some structural comparisons with the martial that we've been looking at. Anyway, this is just a hypothesis, and so I'm curious to hear from our colleagues who are working on Indian and other traditions in our panel today, what you think about that. And so this really leads us to think about what does the martial actually mean? And when we look at, in the Chinese context, the wu always needs to be understood in relation to its contrasting term, which is the wen. And so martial is only part of a relationship between the martial and the civil, which is a structural relationship within culture and within politics. So I'm curious, so first of all, how does this type of ritualization of this relationship, what does that tell us? What can we learn about the martial through this religious ritualization of the relationship that we've just seen in this case? But also I'm quite curious then, what are the parallels? Are there any parallels in other cultures other than China? For example, in various Indian traditions or cultures, in Japan, I know we have a case of Mexico. So what's the relationship between these martial traditions and other, in these literate civilizations, the civilizing and literary positionings in the society and the culture. So, thank you very much, and I look forward to civil and non-martial discussion in our panel. Thank you very much.